maybe elaborate a little bit on the link between industrial agriculture and agroecology, how we can convince the industry that there need to change? What are the arguments we could develop so that we make those people who are a bit resisting convinced that agroecology is the only choice?
Well, I think you talked about industry. I don't think there is one industry. There are many components within the agri-food systems, and some have very divergent interests. I see a very clear difference, for example, between the input suppliers of synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, which will be the big losers in a transformation towards agroecology. And either they will adapt and shift their business into something that is compatible, or they will disappear. I don't think it's a matter of convincing them to adopt agroecology. Either they will see that they need to really change their business altogether, or they will disappear. Other parts of the agribusiness, more on the transformation and commercialization side, see the need and are actually engaging in many ways already in looking at supporting this transformation, not always in a sufficiently holistic manner. And that's why I think there's still a lot of education to be done to see the complementarity and the win-win-win that agroecology can bring from, of course, food security, but at the same time dealing with the climate challenge and biodiversity challenge. Still too many efforts are just focusing either on climate or on biodiversity or on food or nutrition. And what we have to really demonstrate is how agroecology addresses these three things at the same time. So I think we can see a lot of support coming from some parts of the industry, and a lot of changes have been happening also in the last year in that, on that front. But there is still a lot of strong resistance, mainly from the input industry, that sees a big challenge for them to their survival. And they are, I must say, very aggressively trying to undermine agroecology in the minds of people. And we must be aware of that. That's a very, often things are not neutral, the information that is being circulated, and it's very, very biased.
Thank you, Emile. Now questions are coming. There are many. So I'm going to start with the first one. From Madagascar, Nicole is asking, un label agroécologique est-il en perspective au sein de la coalition? Si les
label, agroecological label, is it, are we thinking about something like that? And will we be able to valorize the products and practices? That's a point. I think the way we're going we are looking into at the moment, and that is the main one, is a system of certification that is a participative participation guarantee system that doesn't need an external certification that is very often quite expensive and impossible to really finance for small producers or small farmers. But it's more on a direct and trust relationship between the consumer and the farmer. But we've seen since COVID that a lot of people went straight to the farm to get some food, and they go and see farmers they know, that they trust, and are not necessarily organic certified, but this kind of direct relationship is a way forward. But there is no official certification system that we are looking into at the moment.
Between the difference between climate smart agriculture and agroecology, and Gertrude in Liberia is asking if aquaculture fall under agroecology.
Aquaculture, agroecology covers all forms of agriculture, whether it's crops, livestock, aquaculture, etc. It's really a different approach to production and consumption, as that is aligned with the 13 principles. And often people are asking also the difference between, well, the difference between climate smart. Climate smart is just addressing the climate issue. Often what they mean by climate smart is planting varieties that are more resistant to drought or to higher temperatures. That is not addressing all the problems. I think if you ask me what should be done for climate smart agriculture, I would say it's agroecology, because not only does it address the climate issues, but it addresses at the same time also food security, nutrition, and biodiversity losses.
From Caroline Broudy and Emile Watelier, how can we link the EU partnership agreements that can have an impact on agriculture system in South Pay countries? And
one of the problems is that many governments mainly in developing countries are being lobbied very heavily by either the input supply agribusiness, fertilizer and pesticide companies, but also by some governments that are still pushing for industrial agriculture because in their country they have major multinationals that are trying to do business in developing countries. So I think we must be prepared to counter argument and show how these vested interests are actually just trying to maintain their business and are not looking at the interests of the country itself. These international agreements or bilateral agreements are trying to push, for example, on the side of seeds, they are trying to push for intellectual property protection legislation to be put in place, and seed legislation to be put in place that favors commercial seeds over traditional seeds. And that is often incompatible with the diversity that we need in agroecology, because diversity is an extremely important dimension. It's one of the 13 principles that is really fundamental to provide the necessary resilience. And some people are also asking, but how is the relation between agroecology and organic agriculture? Actually, when organic agriculture started, it had very much the same principles in mind as agroecology as they are defined today. But more and more we have seen legislation defining biological agriculture or organic agriculture to be just focusing on the input substitution part, on which are the chemicals that you can use or cannot use. And if organic agriculture is just about input substitution, it's not really agroecology. But many of the people that are practicing organic agriculture are actually practicing agroecology and are certified on top of that, because they are diversifying production, they are taking measures to improve soil health, to fix carbon in the soil, etc. And they care about the relationship with consumers, etc. But of course, if you have organic agriculture that is doing monoculture of cucumbers in 3,000 hectare greenhouses, where laborers are sleeping in the greenhouse and are treated in a very unfair way, that's not agroecology, even though it's certified as organic agriculture.
Moving to Amadou in Burkina, who is asking whether agroecology can satisfy a population that is growing massively, like in Western Africa. And I would like to add that a series of documents will be given to you for in the capacity 4 days that will allow you to go a bit further in those questions. As I mentioned, where the agroecology has been put in place for quite a few years, we can see that we don't have less yield, we've got more yield than what we had before. And in many places, in particular in developing countries, we see a really significant increase. I mentioned India with 20% increase is a good example. This is a place where there was already using a lot of chemicals, you know, fertilizers and pesticides. But in many places where we don't use those fertilizers, there is even more interest in the yield, 80 to 100%, you know, or even more. So the question whether we can feed the world with agroecology, the answer is for sure yes. There are many proofs and examples now that are showing that it's the case. Thank you. Another question from Tran in Vietnam.
Consider a system as agroecological. Those are among the 13 principles.
That's a very difficult question, because of course, ideally, agroecology should really be implementing the 13 principles, all of them at the same time and fully. But we know that a transition will be necessary. You cannot expect things to happen just overnight. People have to get used to the different practices that are locally adapted. There has to be a lot of innovation to move towards these the implementation of these 13 principles. So there, you cannot really draw a clear line. I think the most important is when you start totally redesigning the system and rethinking the production and transformation system to take into consideration these principles, that's when you start doing agroecology. It's not just about changing some practices in the conventional model of agriculture that is still based on simplification and monocultures, economies of scale, etc. It's when you start thinking about all these aspects at the same time.
And Asunta in Laos is asking, can I implement agroecology on my plot if my neighbors are not? And there is, Emile, another very interesting question coming from Jean-Pierre in Kinshasa.
There's also an interesting one from Jean-Pierre in Kinshasa. Legislation is very important, but sometimes we see countries that are promoting hybrid seeds rather than traditional or local ones. For certain,
depending on what your neighbor is exactly doing, may of course have an impact. If he's spraying chemicals that drift on your field, that will have an influence. But there's certainly no incompatibility. Also because there is no clear certification, and what matters is really applying these 13 principles and not the certification that is linked to it. Regarding au sujet de la législation des semences,
looking at seeds legislation, it's a topic that is really important and really quite delicate in a way, because for years there was a lot of lobbying that's been done by companies that sell hybrid or modified genetically modified seeds to put in place some to protect those those seeds. And this has been done to the detriment of local or traditional seeds. But we are seeing more and more resistance to the implementation of those legislations at international and national level. I have to say that the AFO promoted those kind of seeds, or at least the legislation towards the helping the implementation of those kind of seeds, of those commercial seeds. And they went back and they understood the need to have systems that allow us to carry on using traditional seeds, because they have very interesting characteristics. Most traditional seeds are not uniform, and therefore it's really important for the resilience, because they won't flower all the same day or have the same needs at the same time. And if there are more heat or more drought, then the different components within those varieties will react in a different way and be more stable. So it is important to really carry on fighting so that the policies towards seeds are at least allowing cohabitation between the different seeds, between the ones that want to use the hybrid ones and the ones that want to use more traditional seeds. And because they are not genetically uniform, and they don't always meet the legislation in seeds for commercial seeds. That's the difficulty.
How is the link between nutrition sensitive intervention support to the agroecology?
De nouveau, it's about the same answer I gave about climate smart. Nutrition sensitive is just paying attention to having better nutritional qualities of your form of agriculture. And some people interpret that as, for example, using biofortified varieties. That may be bringing a solution for one micronutrient, for example, but it's certainly not addressing all the issues at the same time. But agroecology, by the nature of agroecology, bringing the diversification, is nutrition, not only nutrition sensitive, but really brings a balanced diet to consumers. So it's much more holistic and can include some of the technologies or approaches that are promoted by nutrition sensitive agriculture, but integrates that within a much broader framework.